Hello again, and welcome to another edition of Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
Alan Singer, Eric's friend and guest.
And Raymond Peterson.
And this is brought to you by the good graces of Manhattan Neighborhood Network and EVT Educational Productions. And we are pre-taping the Wednesday before our Monday air date. And this is going to be a kind of retrospective show that, with luck, we can tie into some of the breaking news. Retrospectively, we can't get more retrospective than 1619 and the 1619 project. So that's an umbrella that will kick us off. So, Alan, let's talk about this 1619 project that the New York Times put out that's been getting all kinds of play and disses and kudos.
All right. First, Raymond and I were joking that there's the Eric Tait criticism of 1619, and then there's everybody else. Because what Eric keeps arguing is that we need to go back to 1613 when the first Afro-Caribbean merchant and trader is in Manhattan, or maybe we should do 1565 when Africans arrive at St. Augustine, which is a Spanish colony in Florida, but is part of the United States. And what I keep arguing is that 1619 is symbolic. And if it wasn't for what the Times did in the commemorations of 1619, because they're not celebrations, the issues of slavery in America and its impact on the United States in the past, but also its continuing impact on the United States, were being overlooked. And that the Times, by focusing on 1619 and the 400th anniversary of the first enslaved Africans arriving in the Jamestown colony, has really got everybody to talk about it. And I think that's the key for me.
Okay. Now, Raymond and I worked on a series called Then I'll Be Free to Travel Home 15 years ago or more, I guess.
A little more than 15
well,
years
the
ago.
video was actually
Don't make me say how long ago.
1999, 2000, but then we turned it into a 13-part radio documentary series. And those 13 hours actually was the initial 1619 project that started with
was before.
1613, 1612, when Juan Rodrigues first came into the Hudson Valley as an independent entrepreneur, folks, not an enslaved black. And he was black Hispanic, so it was an Afro-Caribbean, what they call the Atlantic Creoles.
Yes.
Right. And so for us, we have a slightly different perspective, but that series actually did go into exactly what the underpinnings of this country was all about. And so Alan's broken down the project into some of the issues that we covered in that documentary that the 1619 project also covered essay-wise. The key one you wanted to kick off with, Alan, was...
Well, there were three that were very important to me. And so Nicole Hannah-Jones, she starts off the project by talking about what is the promise of America. And what she's saying is the promise of America has always been tainted by enslavement. That, there was an issue that was raised, some people say, well, the promise of America is religious freedom when the Pilgrims come to Massachusetts in 1620. But you could also argue the promise of America is injustice because enslaved Africans are brought to Virginia in 1619, which really means the promise of America is really complicated.
The promise of America has been whitewashed into religious freedom. The promise of America was money.
Yeah,
The Dutch West India Company
Yeah,
founded the New Amsterdam colony strictly to make money. They wanted the fur trade. They sent people here, and they thought they were going to come here to get rich quick and leave. But it has evolved because other people came because they were being persecuted. And so that became the founding story.
Well, again, that leads into a second article that was very, very powerful by Matthew Desmond. And Matthew Desmond is looking at how capitalism in the contemporary world economic system had its roots in slavery and the transatlantic slave trade. So one of the things that people don't even think about is that capitalism and slavery and the transatlantic slave trade developed together in the 16th and 17th century. And among other things, the infrastructure of Europe, the wealth comes from the trade in people. It comes from the products that people create in the Americas,
Sure.
especially sugar, but all the other industries are growing out of those profits, like shipbuilding, corporations, insurance, banking.
Yeah.
They all are growing as related to the transatlantic slave trade.
Yeah, actually, to be specific, New York Life and a bunch of other insurance companies became big because guess what? They were selling policies to slave owners who actually were insuring their enslaved property. Okay? And
Yeah.
so the insurance business grew on the backs of slavery. The textile mills in New England grew on the backs of the cotton that was grown by the enslaved people in the South. The domino sugar sign that was across the East River for years and years, I'm not sure it's still there because they may have torn it down to
No,
build
I think-
some
I think it's
condos,
still
or,
there. I think it's still
or
there.
it may now have been listed as a historical artifact that they want to keep. But that domino sugar factory that sign commemorates was all about Domino making money from the sugar that was grown in the West Indies, shipped here to be packaged, and I think that was a big sugar
And
packaging
processed,
plant
yeah.
out there, processing out there. And guess what? Enslaved workers were probably doing it here in that plant in the early days.
Oh, actually, no, because the plant really starts after in New York
After it ends?
enslavement is
Oh,
gradually
okay.
ends. But one of the things that people, just to give a sense of how central this was, the owner, the company was originally known as Havemeyer Sugar. Well, Havemeyer was the mayor of the city of New York. So we're not talking about just these isolated things. We're talking people that's central to the growth of the city. But the sugar is coming in from Cuba, and enslaved Africans are being smuggled into Cuba. And who is financing the smuggling of enslaved Africans? Let me see if I have their
C-I-T-I?
Citibank.
C-I-T-I.
Citibank, I always carry this around to remind myself. And Citibank and the founders of Citibank are involved in financing the illegal shipment of enslaved Africans into Cuba so they can have the sugar to send to New York City and to Brooklyn to process so that New York City can become a great wealthy center.
Oh, well, you know, shipbuilding, the
Yeah.
South Street Seaport was a main seaport and one of the biggest, actually, slave ports
Yeah.
on the eastern seaboard. And so the whole country, I think we were talking about this earlier, Jim Horton, Raymond, you remember what Jim Horton said about the entire wealth of the country when we did Then I'll Be Free to Travel Home? He was our main advisor from Georgia.
I don't remember specifically what he said. I can't quote him verbatim, but the entire economy of this country was built on the backs of slaves. Their industry. I mean, there's nothing that ever happened in this country that was produced, manufactured, or built without the help of slaves.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. They
you
built
know,
the
I mean,
capital.
it's a-
They
it's
built
a-
the
it's a-
nation's
it's a
capital.
fact. Yeah, they built the nation's capital.
And a bunch of
They-
other things.
You know, one of the biggest commodities, of course, was cotton, and everybody world over needed cotton. Where did it come from? Where did the bulk of it come from? The South. What was the machine that drove that?
Cotton.
Slavery.
Oh,
Yeah,
Slavery.
the interesting thing about it was
So there's free labor, and how many other things were not necessary for the slave owner to pay for because he had free labor? I mean,
no.
you know, he doesn't have to. You know, the slaves transported to the ships, so he's not paying for local transportation. He's paying shipping fees, but he's paying for very little. The slaves are running the cotton mills, and this
the capitalist wealth of the nation
nation was built on the backs.
But
of
Alan is
slaves.
right. It's not just this nation. It's the
Oh, no, it's the
Western
world. It's-
economy. It's
yes,
the entire
no,
global economy.
Absolutely.
And it became quite interconnected because the South, at the height of the Civil War, thought that they were going to use the cotton strategy to get Britain and France on their side because the British needed Southern cotton
Mhm.
primarily. And so it wasn't until Abraham Lincoln declared that this was not just a war for sectionalism, it was a war to end slavery, that the abolitionists in England said to the British, okay, you got to come down on the side of the North because this is now about freeing people.
Right.
So, yeah.
There's another important part of that British story. The British labor movement refused to unload Southern ships
Oh,
with
did
the
they?
cotton. Yes. So the
didn't
British
know that.
working class, and I'm talking about white people, they felt that the attack on enslaved Africans was an attack on working people. And it's really an example of working class solidarity.
Fabulous.
I wish it happened more often.
Yeah.
But that was a good example. No, cotton and textiles is the takeoff industry that is the basis for the Industrial Revolution. The machinery of the textile industry becomes the machinery of the Industrial
Right.
Revolution.
Right.
But the institutions of capitalism, again, insurance, banking, the limited liability corporation, all develop as part of the transatlantic slave trade and the sale of slave-produced commodities. And New York was at the center of this.
Indeed.
And one of the things people don't often understand is its geography. The Gulf Stream runs north from the Caribbean up the coast of the United States, so that cotton is put on coastal vessels shipped to New York. Sugar is put on coastal vessels and shipped to New York, where it's processed and then it's distributed all over the world. Again, it just goes right back on the Gulf Stream and it takes it to Europe.
Which probably was why the triangular trade became such a fashionable trade geographically, because of the ease and the free labor and all the buttressing instruments like insurance and whatever. And yeah, so yes, that's the capitalistic part. Now let's get to the other aspect of because this all impacts on who we are today, folk.
Well, Brian Stevenson, who has been very active looking at the prison system in the United States, how lynching, really looking at terrorism, and how even after the end of slavery in another name becomes a way of terrorizing black populations.
Yep.
And that this situation continues with the mass imprisonment of young black men in the 1990s. So the Times includes this whole issue in this piece as one of the ongoing impacts of enslavement. And that's the kind of thing that has brought a lot of controversy, because people are saying, well, you're blaming everything. Like the New York Historical Society, their official position is that, yes, there was slavery, but the United States ended in 1863, it was over. Well, what the 1619 Project is arguing is legal enslavement may have ended in 1619, but the consequences of slavery remain with us today. And they got a lot of flack because of that.
Yeah, but Newt Gingrich or whomever, it may have been Lindsey Graham. I didn't do my research before we came on the air, folks. And even though it's a retrospective, I should have. But every once in a while, my brain will say, "Well, call it Newt Gingrich," because he was on.
Probably said it anyway.
Could have been either.
Yeah, but he was calling this 1619 Project not revisionist history, as almost lies and slander, because that's not the history of the United States of America, blah, 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 blah. But the bottom line is, we've been talking about this on Media Watch before, Raymond, you, me, and Bob, and we talked about, and Alan, you've been with us when we've actually documented the fact that the policing of the communities in this country is an outgrowth of slavery and enslavement. New York City didn't really have a real police force probably until after the 1712 slave revolt, okay? And that was one of the first major revolts in the North in this country, right here in the city of New York. And the policing around the bulk of the South grew out of the slave catcher, slave patrol mentality, and all those slave militia groups that were launched to try to bring back the runaway slaves. And so the fact that black male bodies were always looked at as property, not worth anything except of value as labor, meant, okay, if you had to, you didn't want to kill them when they were enslaved because the property was so valuable,
Right.
but your outlook and your mentality about who these people were was that they were less than human. And that has actually permeated into why we have this constant shootings of black and brown men by people in uniform, because it's an ongoing tradition. What was that we were talking about last week, Raymond? The last show, the issue of people walking into black people's homes and killing them or shooting them from the outside.
I don't remember what we were talking
The
about.
Fort Worth,
the Fort Worth, Texas,
young
shooting the woman through the window.
Yeah, I know. Well, you know, it's absurd, but it's as you say. It's been inbred in our society that the dark-colored people are evil. If you see one, they're going to do something to you. So be on your guard. If you have a gun, shoot them because you might get shot first. That's the mentality. I mean, it's not that blatant. And
Yes, it is.
Well,
Florida stand your ground rule is that blatant.
It is that blatant, but I don't think cops go out thinking, well, you know, if I see a black person, I'm going to shoot him. You know, I don't think anybody. Well, some people do go out thinking that. But it's inbred in our. So as you were saying, you know, even people of color suffer from it because it's just imbued in us through the media and everything, television, radio, music, that if you're walking down the street and you see three black guys coming towards you, you might cross the street simply because it's three men of color.
Yeah,
I've done it.
That's happened.
I've done
That's
it.
happened, and it's all part of the insidious negativity that's being fed to the general population, consciously and
Right.
unconsciously. But Alan, you've actually done stuff statistically on stop and frisk in New York, not
Yes.
just nationally,
Oh,
and so you can
Yeah.
speak to the issue of how preponderance it was in just this city, just New York.
Well, I think the estimate is that 90% of the people who were stopped and frisked were African American or Latino in the city of New York. And then what happens, and this is why it's such a vicious thing. So if the police stop and frisk you, and what they do is they say, well, we have a suspicion.
Oh, yeah, you
in
fit the
neighborhood.
description.
You fit the
Yeah,
description.
it was a black guy. Yeah, you fit the description.
I have a friend who was stopped in Manhattan, and the call comes in the radio. Well, the police have stopped him, and the guy turns to the cops and said, "I'm 6'2". That you're looking for someone who's 5'8".
Yeah, but he was a black guy. He was a black guy. You fit the description.
What was the cop's response when he said that to him? Did they even respond?
No, they didn't
Yeah,
respond.
right.
Now, but the insidious thing is that once the police stop you, and if it's a suspect, they have a right to search you. And what happens if you have a marijuana cigarette on you or anything that's suspect, all of a sudden you can be arrested for that. So what you had were all of these young men who were
That's
being
what
picked
stop
up.
and search is all about. Yeah.
But the other thing is, there were young men who'd be stopped, and the police would run, and it would turn out that they're out on probation or they're out on bail, and all of a sudden, they don't have anything on them, but there's a guy with them who has a joint on him, and all of a sudden they go to jail because they're hanging out with someone
Right,
who
right.
broke the law. And
Right.
what you had was mass incarceration. I think they're looking at that since they stop and frisk, the population of Rikers has gone down by 3/4.
Really?
Yeah, most of the people in Rikers are not convicted criminals.
They're just
If you-
waiting to trial.
None of them are.
They're just
all
waiting for
waiting
trial.
They're waiting
Even-
on
yeah,
trial.
some of them are there for like 5, 6, 7 years.
Yeah, they're
waiting
just
for
picked
trial,
up.
Yeah.
And I think if your sentence is more than a year, you're not sent to Rikers. You're sent to a state facility. So
They changed that.
well, no,
was not
that's if
always
you're
the
sentenced.
case.
But,
Oh, if you're
but you
sentenced,
can
that
wait
makes sense.
forever.
Okay, yeah, no, because I remember when people were in there for
Yeah.
like 6, 7 years. you know.
But that
awaiting
was because
trial.
their case got
Right,
postponed.
yeah, no, I
and
understand the reason, it's just not, it's
Yeah.
criminal.
They're there because they can't make bail.
That's it.
Yes, I understand that.
All right,
It's
so
absurd.
By the way, Stevenson's argument is all of this is a remnant of slavery, the
Indeed.
slave system.
indeed it is.
But the charges that were leveled against the Times, again, is that, well, you're making everything the result of racism and slavery. These things aren't really racism. And we
No,
were talking about this
we-
before.
Yes.
So, because why is it?
I'm
not
sorry, I was
racism?
looking to see which time we had, so I didn't.
Okay,
actually
no, we were
repeat
just talking
the whole
about
question.
that people say, well, it's not really racism, and you were saying it is. That
What?
in your experience, so people don't see racism, but as an African
Oh,
American,
right,
they
yeah,
do.
yeah, they don't. It's, how can I explain to you, when I walk into a store,
Mm.
and it's not blatant, but I know that the security guy is keeping an eye on me. I can see it, I can even see it, and you may not notice it at all, because you've never experienced it. And my life is like that. You know, I've been married to a white woman, and I had to explain these things to her because she never saw them until she married me. And then she started, slowly but surely, she started to see these things. Because she was with me, it started to happen to her. You know?
Guilt,
She became
guilt
suspect.
by-
We would walk
guilt by
into
association.
we would walk into a store as a couple, and there would be one security guard peeking around the corner at me, and another one peeking around the corner at her. Yeah, you know.
Guilt by
Yeah,
association.
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've been trying to understand is the white working class and Christian support for Donald Trump, because
6.
you see the rallies on TV, and these people are like glazed with hysterically, and their eyes are glazed and they're screaming hysterically. And I'm saying, you know, you could support him. I could accept. I may not understand it, but I could accept it. But how do you have this intense hysterical desired screaming? You know, he's going to make America great again, America first.
Send them back. Send her back.
Send them, and lock them up. And I believe that a lot of it is related to race. And I think that's, again, the point of 1618. And I'm not saying that everybody there is a racist. And I'm not saying everybody who votes for Trump is a racist. But people see improving their own condition as a contest with everybody else. So they see decline in their position. It must be the cause of brown people and black people and stupid liberals who think black people and brown people deserve a break. So what we're looking at is they see people like me as naive, because I believe that people can work together and build a better world, because they see it as a competition. It's like a football game, and they want their team to win.
Right.
And again, so much of that, the teams are aligned based on race and ethnicity.
Okay, so now, it just so happened that I fell asleep on my couch last night. When I woke up, there was a Frontline documentary on that dealt with zero tolerance.
Mm.
And they went into the background of how Steve Bannon, Steve Miller, no, not Steve, yes, that's Steve Miller, yeah,
Steve
yeah,
Miller.
and Jeff Beauregard Sessions were the fringe right-wing people who needed a political candidate to attack the establishment Republicans. And Breitbart became the central focus with Bannon running it, and they decided immigration was the issue that they were going to use to bring down the Republican Party as it was then construed back in 2015. And they selected Eric Cantor as the vulnerable mainstream Republican, and so they put all their forces behind using the immigration issue as the wedge to primary their Republican guy, and they succeeded. And once they succeeded, and Cantor was leading the charge for an actual comprehensive immigration reform bill where the Democrats and the Republicans had come together to make that happen. And that's where they decided, no, we don't want that. So you've got these right-wing fringe people who've decided they're going to change U.S. policy
Right.
by primarying the then speaker, or not minority,
Yeah.
whip. And they succeeded, and the rest of the Republican Party quaked in their boots and got rid of any collaboration for immigration reform. And they figured they were going to use that issue with a candidate.
Mhm.
And they found their candidate in Donald Trump. And he succeeded by using that same immigration wedge issue as his crowning glory. And they gave him a mnemonic to remember what his main issue is: build a wall.
Right.
And this is all about race and keeping the other out.
Oh, sure.
That's what this is all about. And so when the 1619 Project says, stop building your society on making black people the other or brown people the other that you are going to target because they're coming for your jobs, etc., etc., the project is correct. That's what the country has now turned back to
Right.
from the
Turned
early
back.
days.
Well,
Yeah,
and
that was
it's
turned
so-
back to.
before and during the Civil War, white workers in the North were not supportive of the end of slavery. And one of the reasons for that was they were afraid that blacks would leave the South and
Come
take
to
their
the
jobs.
Come to the
or
North,
go
yeah, right,
west
sure.
and take jobs. And so within the last minute that we have, minute and 28 seconds or whatever,
20? Yeah.
we how do we get away from the negativity, all right? Because you understand, folk, that we're all in this boat together. Without black, brown people, there was no United States of America. Without the Asians helping to build your transcontinental railroad, there is no real connected America. At some point, we have to come to the realization that we can't be trying to fight and divide each other. All right. So, Alan,
I just want to add one more thing. Oh,
Sure, go ahead. No, go.
Because they targeted Eric Cantor. And I find that very insidious. Why? Because Eric Cantor was a Republican Jew. So when Breitbart...
a real
and-
other.
Right. So they didn't just go after a Republican who they were going to bring down to change the party. They went after the premier Republican Jew.
Fantastic.
And there's that
Here
element
comes-
of anti-Semitism
that's the other. Yes.
since it was there as well.
Ray, you get the last 20 seconds.
Well, I can't do it in 20 seconds. I need more
Okay,
than
this
that
has
because
been this has been Media Watch, folks. I'm Eric Tait,
Alan Singer.
Raymond Peterson.
and we'll catch you the next time.